Welcome to the Jay-Z Show. This is Counterpoint editor Zafar Sobhan. I'm joined, as always, by John Danilowicz. And we're back in our StreamYard discussion. Last time we had a very luxurious, we were in the Bongo BD studios, but now we're back to our more mundane fare. But still, I think the screens are looking pretty good. And I see from behind you, John, that you are celebrating just as much as everyone else in Bangladesh.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great to be with you again. Although it was fun to be in person, but it's good to get the ball rolling again now that we're in different parts of the world. But yeah, I think the story for me, the probably the best story in U.S. Bangladesh relations in many years, if not ever, has been the introduction of, I guess you coined the term, the Sullivans.
That's right, the
In on
Sullivan
the
twins.
on the Sullivan twins on the football, or I guess we would say soccer stage. So we're all getting ready for the World Cup here in the United States. There's a little bit of soccer fever, but the story out of Bangladesh with these two young men coming back to play for their ancestral homeland in Bangladesh, and not just playing, but playing a critical role in Bangladesh's under 20 team winning the championship. But what did it look like on the ground? Is there Sullivan mania in Dhaka?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, especially Ronan, who was the big star of the team, and especially I think I don't know how much you follow football or soccer as you would call it, but his he showed great aura, as the kids speak, as the kids say these days. He scored the game-winning penalty with a panenka, which is a very cool way to finish it off, and he really did very well. Declan, his brother, is actually a very good player as well, and I'm among those who think that he should have gotten more playing time. But I think these things will iron themselves out. It was wonderful to see them play for Bangladesh, and by all accounts, they were very pleased and very happy to play. And this is interesting for me because, of course, I know the family very well. I may have mentioned in other contexts that their grandmom Sultana Alam was, in fact, she met me at the airport when I first came to college in the U.S. And I stayed with them for a couple of days, and then she drove me to university. So I mean, that's the level of sort of engagement I have. And of course, Haika, their mum, who I also know, Sultana's daughter, she's a great football player. She played football for UPenn, and then her husband was also a UPenn football player, and her father-in-law was a legendary UPenn football coach. So there's a great deal of footballing pedigree in the Sullivan family from Pennsylvania. I don't know where they're from, actually. And then Haika herself, of course, has a great deal of footballing talent, so that's no surprise. You may or may not know that they have two brothers, one of whom, their eldest brother, Quinn, plays for the U.S. men's national team, and the younger brother, Kavan, who's, I think, 15 or 16, and is, by all accounts, the number one prospect in his age in the world. And, I think he probably hopes to play for the U.S. Sometime in the future. So it's unlikely that he'll be turning out for Bangladesh. But we're really glad to get Declan and Ronan because like I said, these kids like them, they're our wandering sons, and we welcome them home with open arms always.
Yeah,
and it's good to
no,
see.
I mean, to me, it's a great story. It's no secret that the discussion, the debate about immigration in the U.S. has been very charged in recent years. There's been a distressing amount of Islamophobia that has been circulating in many quarters, particularly elements of the Republican Party, and some of that has been further accelerated by events in the Middle East and the war with Iran. So at a time when immigrants or people with immigrant backgrounds, which is all of us, to be honest, have to be a little bit sheepish about our backgrounds, our beliefs, our religious beliefs. This is a moment to celebrate. And again, I heard an interview that Ambassador Christensen gave, I guess his first interview, which he gave a few days back, and he talked about soft power. He talked about soft power. There was some discussion of immigration. And, again, a story that's often overlooked is the incredible achievements of the Bangladeshi American community, whether it's first generation, second generation, whether it's someone's fully Bangladeshi by heritage, or mixed with others. Again, this is the American story. So it's been great. And I think, frankly, with everything happening in Bangladesh on the political front, the economic front, I'm guessing that everyone could use a little bit of good news. So thanks to the Sullivans, and congratulations to the whole team for giving everyone who cares about Bangladesh something to cheer for in recent days.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think in the context of where America is today, I spent many, many years of my life in America myself, and it seems, for me, the America I know, immigration was always absolutely a key part of that story. America is a land of immigrants, and I think what we're seeing right now is we're really seeing a battle for what America is and what America should be, and I really think that some of the greatest American stories are these stories of immigrants, whether we're talking about, the Irish immigrants from the 19th century, where they're talking about Jewish, Italian, Eastern European immigrants from the early 20th century, and then, of course, immigrants from Asia, South Asia, and East Asia as well, China, Japan, in the 20th century. I mean, these are great, great stories. And, and of course, a lot of that is, in my mind, what goes to make America the country that it is. It's the best of America. And so, of course, I think that battle is raging. And so these reminders that this is America, that this too is America, and that countries like Bangladesh and America can have these ties which draw us closer together, I think are very salutary. And I think these are the stories we need. You mentioned we're in need of some good news in Bangladesh, and that's absolutely true. Of course, good news in America, good news for the world. And I think right now, as we record this edition of the Jay-Z show, the ceasefire has been announced. Is it official now, John?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, and I've seen statements from the U.S. government, the Iranian government, the Pakistani government. So I think that checks all the boxes. I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen anything from the Israeli government, but I doubt that President Trump would have made his statement had Israel not been fully on board as well. So it seems that we have a ceasefire, and it appears that there'll be direct talks between the belligerents in Islamabad in the coming days.
No, I mean, it's incredible because, for a while there, we were absolutely, standing on the precipice, staring down into the abyss. And I mean, I think that's somewhere no one in this world wants to be. Interesting as well is that the role Pakistan is playing. So I know you, for instance, feel that, you've served in Pakistan, and you feel that Pakistan should play can play more of a role in global affairs, and that you're always talking about how normalizing relationships between Pakistan and Bangladesh, Pakistan and India even, would be in everyone's interest. So this is surely also, it's not the main story, but it's part of the story.
No, absolutely. And, being a mediator or putting oneself forward as a mediator is always a tricky business. And oftentimes, the belligerents don't want to have somebody else involved. They prefer to deal directly. But I think in this case in particular, given the history between the United States and Iran, it was going to be very difficult for the U.S. and Iran to work something out between the two of them, and particularly given, what's transpired in recent weeks. So I think Pakistan stepping forward made a lot of sense. And even kind of in retrospect, the more one thinks about it, the more sense it makes. Pakistan is a neighbor of Iran. It has played a role as Iran's so-called protecting power in the United States in the absence of U.S.-Iranian direct relations. There's an Iranian intersection at the Pakistani embassy in Washington. Obviously, Pakistan has deep security ties with others in the Middle East, most recently the pact signed with Saudi Arabia. We've seen high-level interactions between Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and others. And the Pakistani foreign minister, deputy prime minister, went to Beijing recently for discussions there. So Pakistan is well positioned in having relations with the United States, with Iran, with the Middle Eastern powers, and certainly with China, which I think positions it well. And, personal relations obviously come into play, and the fact that, President Trump repeatedly refers to his favorite, field marshal, and has positive things to say about the Pakistani prime minister shows that there's a personal rapport as well. And Pakistan has used this in the past. I mean, certainly that was the case back in 1971 when the U.S. was looking to open relations with China. So I think at this moment, all eyes are on Islamabad. And if things progress as we hope they do, I think Pakistan gets a feather in its cap. Somebody was joking online that last year, Prime Minister Sharif nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. This year, maybe President Trump will have to return the favor, or at a minimum, add Prime Minister Sharif to his own nomination.
Yeah, that might actually. Well, it would be very incredible to see all three of them get it. And you see this sometimes. I think during Vietnam, for instance, I forget when Henry Kissinger, the
Right.
Vietnamese premier, got it at the same time, and so this could be we could have the younger Khamenei, the son who's now the supreme leader, Trump, and I don't know, either the field marshal or someone else getting it. But I have to, before we move on, I have to sort of take issue with one thing. I know many people here in Bangladesh also would take issue, because a couple of times you've referred to the belligerents in the plural when you're talking about this, what's happening in Iran. And I think many people around the world would say that, well, that's suggesting a kind of equivalency which isn't really there. There's really one more belligerent side than the other. I mean, do you think that there's something we're missing from that picture?
Yeah. So again, maybe it's semantics. The two sides are fighting, right? They're both, firing missiles at each other. There is combat involved on both sides. So for me, it's a definitional issue. They're both belligerents. That's not to say that one bears greater or lesser responsibility for the conflict. I mean, it's pretty clear that this most recent round was started by the United States and Israel. Now, the justification will point back to previous provocations. So just as terminating wars can be tricky, determining when a war actually starts can also be somewhat controversial at times. But I think what I'm just trying to get the point here is that those who are fighting are the United States and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other. What's interesting, even though again there have been targets hit elsewhere in the Gulf, this is very different. The American way of war in the 20th century and the 21st century was to fight as part of a alliance or a coalition. In fact, previous U.S. administrations in both Iraq wars and certainly in Afghanistan and even in Vietnam and Korea went to great lengths to assemble coalitions. So we always talked about whether it was UN forces or allied forces, under one, banner or another. But there's been very little involvement, much to President Trump's chagrin, very little involvement of other countries in this current fighting.
This time around, yeah, it's the U.S. and Israel. But let me ask you, sitting in America, what was the reaction? What did other people and you yourself make of the statement issued by President Trump, where he said that it really sounded like a threat to unleash all kinds of retribution on Iran, and up to and including nuclear weapons. I mean, that was certainly the indication I got. How was that taken in the U.S.? How did people think of that?
Yeah. So again, we live in the social media age in which presidents don't issue statements. They don't hold press conferences. They issue a tweet or a post on Truth Social or some other social media. Again, it's certainly unconventional for a president to speak in this way. I'm pretty certain there are other channels that were being used to communicate with the Iranian government and with other parties in the conflict. So the way I interpret what President Trump was doing with social media was communicating, frankly, to his own base. He was communicating to an audience in the United States, and frankly, it's an audience that over the years has shown that they like it when President Trump talks this way. I mean, many who voted for him because he was not a conventional politician. So if you point out to him that his predecessors wouldn't have spoken the same way, then I think that would for him prove his point that he's somewhat unconventional. Now, there is in international relations, there's the so-called madman theory. And, if you think about this even back to, the Nixon administration and the Vietnam War, I mean, there was a lot of saber rattling, frankly, even back in the Korean War as well, when there was a change in administration, that you want to publicly signal that you're willing to go to a great length or great extent. In a sense, then you're the quote unquote bad cop, which then makes it easier for somebody else who's playing the good cop or the more reasonable negotiator to score their
Yeah.
points. But I don't think in this way or in this particular case that President Trump was really trying to communicate with the Iranian leadership or anyone else. He was communicating to his base. Now, the tricky part, and I think ultimately this was the real dilemma for President Trump and the administration, is that the markets are listening. And you see these wild gyrations, whether it be in stock markets and oil prices, in other economic indicators, because when the president of the United States says something, there's a certain number of people who think that you should believe what he's saying, and then they
Mhm.
act accordingly. So that was the dilemma, I think, for President Trump, and continues to be that as much as he may want to act
Mhm.
tough, he's not willing and he doesn't want to pay the economic price that comes along with that.
I mean, I think if it's if it's all bluster and if it's all essentially sort of a negotiating tool, I mean that's all well and good. I think the fear many of us have around the world is that he is fundamentally. I mean, we don't know, but he appears to be fundamentally such an unstable person that he may well, in fact, go that next step. And we talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close the world came to nuclear war at that point in time. Whereas here we have, I mean, I think by some accounts, it was 90 minutes before the deadline issued. And what would have happened had that deal not been broken? Now, as
Hmm.
you say, it's perhaps there was all of this discussion going on in the background, which regular people were not privy to. So maybe there was not a realistic chance that that 90-minute, that deadline would be passed without the conditions being met. But it seemed very nerve-wracking for those of us who are watching on the outside. And the fear is, of course, is that now, of course, we've stepped back from the precipice, but where will negotiations go in the
Mm.
next week, the next month? It's also possible, as you say, that that President Trump is a more rational actor than we understand and give him credit for, and that in the final analysis he will also pull back from the precipice, and he's looking at this as really kind of a tool of
Mm.
statecraft rather than anything else. I don't know. I mean, I think that's the concern.
Yeah, and
Now,
you lived in New York City. I've never lived in New York, so I've never dealt with New York, real estate developers or New York businessmen or landlords.
mhm,
I don't know how much of this bluff and bluster is part of the normal way of people doing business. Again, certainly President Trump brings a very unconventional background and unconventional style. Um, and I can understand the concern both here at home and abroad. At the same time, I'm somebody, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I still believe that our institutions are strong enough to hold. So even if President Trump were to give an order that were an extreme, I mean, again, there was a lot of discussion in recent
mhm,
days about the threats to civilian infrastructure, to desalinization plants, to power
mhm.
plants. And many commentators online were quick to say, well, this would constitute a war crime. I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you whether or not blowing up a desalinization plant is a war crime. But I can tell you who does take this seriously. It's the United States Officer Corps, regardless of their service. So from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff down to the operator who is operating the aircraft or the missile battery or the drone, if they're given an order, they are trained from the inception of their careers that they are only obligated to follow lawful orders. So I'm confident that regardless of what somebody's career aspirations, and even political leanings might be, as a professional military officer, they're not going to follow unlawful orders. So I think there are some guardrails on our system which may not be as readily apparent to people outside the country.
And what is the situation in terms of actually a nuclear strike. I know there's the nuclear football, which apparently is, is chained to some guy's arm, and it follows the president everywhere he goes. Is that something that requires congressional approval, or is that something a president can make that decision? I mean, what would the process be?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, I'm not briefed on the specifics of U.S. kind of nuclear command and control, and if I was, I couldn't tell you. But based on
But what do
my
you know?
my
I'm
educated
sure you
guess,
know more than I do.
based on what I've seen and read and heard and believe, the president has a lot of latitude in this regard, and that's almost by design. I mean, in a situation in which those weapons had to be used, you would need presumably to make a quick decision. And again, there are different circumstances under which one might make that decision, but I think it would be overly burdensome to have a requirement for congressional consultation. So the president has that authority, but I don't think it's a situation whereby a president would make such a decision without a consensus of his advisors. And there are
Yeah.
other provisions that could potentially come into play. So, again, I don't worry about the use of nuclear weapons in this scenario. There are a lot of other tools that the president would have before that. And again, I'm also a believer that ultimately war is a rational act in that it's guided by a political objective. So before a president or any military leader would use a means of warfare, they would have to think what would be the effects and would that help them achieve their political objective. And in the case of Iran, I can't see how using a nuclear weapon in any circumstance would help achieve a political objective. So I don't worry about that, but certainly I can understand the concerns that other people would have, and I can understand the concerns everyone has when they wake up in the morning and think about what the impact is on their lives. I've been watching, for example, people talking about the tremendous queues for petrol in Dhaka, and the real
Sure.
decisions people are having to make. Not to mention the other impacts, including the potentially catastrophic ones as the agricultural season progresses, and what happens if there are fertilizer shortages or lack of other input. So there's real world implications of this. So peace is in everyone's interest.
No, I mean, in Bangladesh, certainly. I mean, the thing is this, if you look at the incoming BNP government, they started off with a pretty challenging ask in terms of the situation they inherited, and it's only got more difficult. And I suspect that that fuel, and as you say, it has knock-on effects for fertilizer and for the price of food. So this is going to be a challenge, not just in Bangladesh, but sort of worldwide. But let me ask you just one last to bring it back. How is this all playing in the U.S.? So, for instance, I know, for instance, there's a certain segment of President Trump's constituency who said that the reason they voted for him is because he would bring an end to forever wars, and they were, in fact, it's a very interesting the mindset. They were very critical of both the President Bushes, because they said, well, Republicans have typically been warmongers, and so now you've got Trump coming in, and he's promising he's not going to be that person, almost like a sort of a leftist reason from in the context of U.S. politics for voting for him. But now, of course, we've seen that he's very willing to use U.S. military strength in this, in this war against Iran. And then the other thing which you alluded to is the impact it's had on the price of oil, the impact it's had economically. How is this viewed in America? Is this a popular war? Is this a popular military action? And there are going to be elections in November. Do you think that this is going to play a major role? And what do you anticipate will be the fallout, the result of all of this?
Yeah. So my guess would be for the vast majority of Americans, they're just focused on, kind of their day-to-day concerns and what the impact will be. So again, cost of energy, inflation, to some extent, what's happening to their savings. Then there's another very small minority who have loved ones in harm's way. These are military families, and they obviously have a primary concern for their loved ones. Then, in terms of those who are more politically active and aware, you have the supporters of the Democratic Party, the more progressives, and they hate everything that President Trump does already. So this only makes them hate it more. And it probably mobilizes and motivates them to some extent, particularly younger people who see themselves as, potentially, being caught up in, these conflicts. But the most interesting divide right now is within the Republican Party and within what's, broadly defined as the MAGA movement. And this MAGA movement has really split down the middle. There's a wing who are, I think, more focused on Israel, and go back to the kind of neoconservative roots of the party. And those have been the ones who I think President Trump has been listening to the most, and those are the ones most adamant in favor of the war. But there's been I think, a real schism in the MAGA movement with those who, again, took a more isolationist view towards foreign policy, were against the wars that the United States had fought in the 21st century. And there's some very prominent voices. I mean, probably first and foremost being Tucker Carlson. But even this morning, I woke up and one of the first posts I saw on X was from Alex Jones, a well-known conspiracy theorist who is very much a supporter of President Trump. And he was calling for President Trump to be removed from office via the 25th Amendment. So, I had the immediate reaction that there are many people who probably have never agreed with Alex Jones on anything, yet now they find themselves lining up. So then the question is, even if the war ends today or within this 2-week period or very soon, I think there's going to be lasting effect. And I think that's going to certainly go into the elections in November. I think overall it will demotivate the Republican Party and President Trump's base. It may not get to the point where a staunch supporter of President Trump is going to vote for a Democrat, but they may very well just stay home and not show up at a rally. They may not contribute to a candidate, and they may not vote. So then the enthusiasm momentum all goes to the Democrat side. The independent swing voters will probably, swing against the president and his party. So I would anticipate a bloodbath for the Republicans in the House of Representatives. Senate math is a little different. The Republicans have fewer seats to defend, and many of the seats that they have are in very strong, Republican states. But with a slim or no majority left in the Senate, and with likely a significant deficit in the House, I think the Republicans are going to have a very difficult time in the next 2 years. And then, once the midterm elections happen, the 2028 presidential election basically kicks off. And I think now many of the Republican would-be candidates are having second thoughts, because if the Republicans are not likely to win in 2028, does somebody want to go down with the ship, or will they want to wait until some time has passed? So yeah, this will have, I think, devastating effects, politically for the Republicans.
Okay. And I mean, it's perhaps premature to talk about it, but it seems that the two front runners for 2028 in the Republican Party are Secretary of State Rubio and Vice President Vance. I mean, do you think, do you anticipate anyone else throwing their hat into the ring, or do you think it's really going to be between these two?
No, there'll certainly be other candidates who will throw their hat in the ring. Whether there's anyone else from the, in the race to position themselves as Trump's successor, from the MAGA wing of the party, I don't know. I think you're right that it's probably Rubio and Vance who fight it out for that. But I would think you would have some of the, say, more traditional mainstream Republicans coming forward. There's also a very strong libertarian strain within the Republican Party. And what I could see, and again, that strain has been very vocally anti-war and frankly critical of Israel's influence on U.S. politics. So I could definitely see a strong candidacy by a libertarian, whether somebody like Rand Paul or Thomas Massey, or maybe even somebody more from the libertarian side coming forward. So I think it's going to be tough sledding for the Republicans in November.
But again, looking beyond November, part of it is, of course, having the right candidate for the Democrats, and I think part of the problem the Democratic Party faces, and a big part of the success and the reason President Trump has been elected twice to the presidency, is that they're also in many ways, going off in directions which obviously don't sit well with the American people. I mean, do you see anyone on the Democratic side of the aisle who you think could make a plausible president for sort of mainstream America? I mean, the names we hear, people like Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, but it seems to me that that for mainstream America, that's not really going to be the kind of. We also hear Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who's the congresswoman from New York. But these are people from really the sort of the liberal left wing of the Democratic Party. I don't really see them playing outside of places like California and New York City.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be the soul searching that the Democrats have to do is, do they focus on who the most electable candidate is, or do they again, end up falling for the, kind of more radical candidates? I mean, this is the problem both parties have in terms of the primary process. The other interesting factor is the role of money in politics in the U.S. And traditionally, it had always been seen that the Republicans have the advantage because Republicans are seen as the party of the business community. But the new phenomenon that's emerged in recent years is, the extreme wealth from the billionaire kind of tech gurus, whether it be
Yeah.
Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, or, some of the others. So again, there's an interesting nexus that you see playing out in the war in Iran right now between, some of these high tech companies, the AI entrepreneurs who also are now involved in the defense industry. So it'll be interesting to see where they put their support. In many ways, that's why J.D. Vance became, vice president, because he had the support from that group. So whether that money finds another home, I think that's going to be one of the main factors going forward. There's limits, obviously, to how much influence money can have in politics, but it can't be dismissed.
No, I mean, and that's, like I said, not just in America, that's all over the world. On that note, I think we should call it a day. We ended up speaking much more about America and the world and much less about Bangladesh today, but I don't think that's any bad thing. Sometimes it does us good to cast our eyes, to the horizon and see what else is going on. Great discussion as always, John. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of those who are tuning in, and please join us again 2 weeks from today, I guess.
Great. See you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.